Isadora Nkrumah, a stunning black choral conductor, stands poised in an emerald gown, her baton slicing through the air. Her four gifted children, the Nkrumah Quartet, play their violins with breathtaking harmony at a lavish wedding. The catch? It's the wedding of her ex-husband, the man who betrayed her, marrying the woman who stole him away. Every note Isadora conducts is a testament to her resilience, her pain transformed into art. What will happen when their eyes meet across the ballroom? Can she rise above the past? Where are you listening from? Chicago, London? Drop a comment below and share your predictions for this tale of betrayal and triumph. Subscribe now to catch our latest stories and join our community of dreamers. Will Isadora find love again? Stick around to uncover the melody of her victory. Hit that subscribe button and let's dive in. The auditorium of Chicago's St. Augustine Cultural Center pulsed with anticipation, its vaulted ceiling swallowing the murmurs of 1,000 eager souls. Golden light spilled from chandeliers, bathing the stage where Isadora Nkrumah stood, a vision carved from midnight and melody. At 32, her ebony skin glowed like polished obsidian, her sapphire gown clinging to her elegant frame as if tailored by the stars themselves. Her presence was a command, her beauty a quiet storm. In her right hand, a slender baton hovered, poised to summon music from the heavens. The St. Augustine Choir, 30 voices strong, stood behind her, men and women of every hue, their eyes fixed on her, awaiting the spark that would ignite their song. Isadora inhaled, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and expectation, and with a flick of her wrist, the first notes of Mozart's Ave Verum Corpus soared, weaving a tapestry of divine harmony that hushed the crowd. Isadora was no ordinary conductor. Born in Harlem to a single mother who sang gospel in smoky jazz clubs, she had clawed her way to Juilliard on scholarships and sheer grit. Her genius was not just in her ear for pitch or her knack for blending voices. It was in her ability to make music feel like a heartbeat, raw and alive. Critics called her a prodigy. Audiences called her a revelation. Tonight, as her baton danced, she was both sculpting sound with the precision of a surgeon and the passion of a poet. The choir's voices rose and fell, a tide of human longing, and Isadora felt it in her bones, the thrill of creation, the power of unity. She was home. Among the tenors stood Frederick Langston, his green eyes catching the stage lights like emeralds. Tall and lean, with a shock of chestnut hair and a voice that could melt stone, he was the choir's star and Isadora's husband. They had met 4 years ago at a music festival in Vienna, where he'd sung a Schubert lieder so tenderly she'd forgotten to breathe. Over late-night coffees and moonlight sonatas, they'd fallen in love, their dreams intertwining like the counterpoint of a Bach fugue. He was a white man from a wealthy Connecticut family, she a black woman from the streets of New York, but music erased their differences. They married in a small ceremony, vowing to build a life where every day sang. Now, 3 years later, Isadora was pregnant, her body a vessel for new life, her heart swelling with the promise of their future. As the final chord of the Mozart piece lingered, the audience erupted, their applause a thunderclap that shook the rafters. Isadora turned to her choir, her smile a beacon, and they bowed as one. Frederick caught her eye, his grin boyish, and her chest warmed. Off stage, he swept her into his arms, his lips brushing her forehead. "You were incandescent," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. She laughed, swatting his chest, but the compliment settled like a melody she'd hum for days. They lingered in the green room, sipping sparkling water as choir members swapped stories, the afterglow of performance binding them like family. Isadora's hand rested on her belly, a subtle curve beneath her gown, and she imagined their child, a tiny maestro perhaps, destined to wield a baton or strum a violin. But beneath the harmony, a faint discord stirred. Frederick had been different lately, his rehearsals stretching into the night, his phone buzzing with calls he answered in hushed tones. "It's just work," he'd say, his smile tight, when she asked why he was late again. He was a rising music producer now, juggling studio sessions and choir commitments. and Isadora told herself it was the pressure of ambition. She, too, was consumed, composing a new choral suite, Rivers of Resilience, inspired by her mother's struggles. Mornings found her hunched over her piano, scribbling notes between bouts of nausea, her pregnancy a quiet symphony of its own. She dismissed her unease, chalking it up to hormones and exhaustion. Frederick loved her. Their life was a duet, perfectly tuned. Yet as they drove home that night, the Chicago skyline glittering like a score of stars, a shadow lingered. Frederick's hand rested on the wheel, not on hers, and his silence felt heavier than usual. "You okay?" Isadora asked, her voice soft. He nodded, eyes fixed on the road. "Just tired," he said, but the words carried a weight she couldn't name. At their loft, she slipped into bed, the city's hum a distant lullaby. Frederick joined her, his arm circling her waist, but his touch felt mechanical, like a note played out of key. She closed her eyes, willing away the doubt, and hummed a fragment of her new composition, its melody a prayer for the life they'd built. In the quiet, Isadora's dreams took her back to Vienna, the cobblestone streets, Frederick's laughter as they danced to a street violinist's waltz. She saw their future, a family, a stage, a legacy of music. But even in sleep, a question gnawed, faint as a whisper in the strings. Was their harmony as flawless as she believed? The answer waited, hidden in the shadows of the days to come. But for now, Isadora slept, her heart still singing, her world whole. The rehearsal hall of the St. Augustine Choir buzzed with the hum of tuning voices, a sanctuary where Isadora Nkrumah wove her magic. The late afternoon sun slanted through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Isadora, 6 months pregnant, stood at a music stand, her sapphire eyes scanning sheet music for her new choral suite, Rivers of Resilience. Her belly, a gentle curve beneath her flowing black blouse, pulsed with the quiet rhythm of life. Quadruplets, the doctor had said, a miracle and a weight. She adjusted a page, her fingers trembling from fatigue, but her spirit burned bright. The choir, her second family, milled about, their laughter a soft counterpoint to the ache in her lower back. Yet as she prepared to call them to order, a venomous whisper slithered through the air, sharp enough to pierce her heart. It came from the soprano section where Clara Beaumont held court. Clara, 26, with golden curls and a smile that cut like glass, was the choir's newest star, her voice a crystalline blade. Isadora had admired her talent, even mentored her, but now Clara's words froze her blood. "He says I'm his muse," she purred to a cluster of singers, her tone dripping with triumph. "Last night, in the choir loft, he couldn't keep his hands off me." A giggle, cruel and deliberate, followed. Poor Isadora, waddling around, clueless. The name Frederick hung unspoken, but it roared in Isadora's ears. Her husband, her Frederick, with his green eyes and tender promises, was the man Clara claimed. The room spun, the music stand blurring as her pulse thundered. She gripped the edge, her knuckles whitening, and forced herself to breathe. Not here, not now. Isadora called the rehearsal to order, her voice steady as granite, though inside she was fracturing. The choir sang, their harmonies soaring, but to her it was noise, a mockery of the life she'd built. Clara's smirk burned into her, each note from the soprano's throat a taunt. Frederick, in the tenor section, avoided her gaze, his face a mask of practiced calm. Had he always been this stranger? The man who'd danced with her in Vienna, who'd vowed to love her through every crescendo, now stood complicit in her humiliation. Rehearsal ended, and Isadora dismissed the choir, her smile a brittle shield. She lingered, pretending to organize scores, until the hall emptied, save for the truth she could no longer dodge. At their loft that evening, the Chicago skyline glittered coldly beyond the windows. Isadora stood by the piano, her hands idle on the keys, when Frederick walked in, his coat slung over his shoulder. The air crackled with unspoken accusations. She reached into his coat pocket, her fingers closing around a silk scarf, its floral scent alien and cloying. Clara's perfume. "Is it true?" she asked, holding it up, her voice low but lethal. Frederick froze, his green eyes darting like a cornered animal's. "Isadora, it's not," he began, but she cut him off. "Don't lie to me. Not now." The scarf trembled in her hand, a fragile thread unraveling their marriage. His silence was louder than any confession, a cacophony of guilt that drowned out years of love. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he finally said, his voice a weak echo of the man she'd adored. "Clara, she's just a fling. It doesn't mean anything." The words were a blade, slicing through the dreams they'd spun together. Isadora's laugh was bitter, sharp. "A fling? In my choir? Under my nose?" Her hand rested on her belly, the quadruplets stirring as if sensing her anguish. "You betrayed me, Frederick. You betrayed us." He stepped toward her, hands outstretched, but she recoiled. "Don't," she warned, her eyes blazing. "You don't get to touch me anymore." The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in with the weight of his betrayal. That night, alone in their bedroom, Isadora wept, not for him, but for the woman she'd been, the one who'd believed in forever. The shower ran to muffle her sobs, her tears mingling with the water as she mourned the life she'd imagined. By dawn, her resolve had hardened like steel. She called a lawyer, her voice calm as she instructed them to draft divorce papers. Frederick was still asleep, oblivious to the end of their duet. She stood over him, memorizing his face. Not out of love, but to remind herself of the cost of trust. "You'll never break me," she whispered, her words a vow to the children within her. The next morning, she filed for divorce at the courthouse, her signature a final downbeat. The clerk, a kind-eyed woman, offered a sympathetic nod, but Isadora didn't need pity. She was 6 months pregnant, carrying 4 lives, and her strength was a symphony no one could silence. Back at the loft, she packed a suitcase, music sheets, a few dresses, her mother's old gospel hymnal. Frederick's absence, as he left for another late session, was a mercy. She stood at the window, the city sprawling before her, and felt the first kick from her babies, a fierce reminder of what mattered. The scarf lay, discarded on the floor, a relic of a life she was leaving behind. Isadora stepped into the elevator, her heart heavy but unbroken, ready to compose a new movement, one where she was the sole conductor. The fluorescent lights of Chicago General Hospital buzzed like a swarm of restless bees, their cold glare casting stark shadows across the delivery room. Isadora Nkrumah lay on the operating table, her body a battlefield, her heart a drumbeat of fear and resolve. At 32, 6 months pregnant with quadruplets, she had been rushed in when her water broke during a sleepless night, her contractions a violent overture to a miracle she wasn't ready for. The room thrummed with urgency, beeping monitors, clipped voices of nurses, the sterile clink of instruments. Isadora's breath hitched, her ebony skin slick with sweat, as Dr. Lena Patel, a steely-eyed obstetrician, barked orders to the neonatal teams. "They're coming early," Lena said, her gloved hand steady on Isadora's arm. "But we're ready." Isadora nodded, her lips pressed tight, and whispered a prayer to her mother's spirit. "Keep them safe." The delivery was a storm of chaos and wonder. Kofi came first, a boy with skin as dark as his mother's, his wail piercing the air like a trumpet's call. Malik followed, smaller but fierce, his tiny fist clenched as if ready to fight the world. Then Elise, fair-skinned with a whisper of green eyes, her cry soft but persistent, a delicate violin note. Margot, the last, emerged with a performer's flair, her wail bold and unyielding, demanding to be heard. Born at 30 weeks, the quadruplets were whisked to the NICU, their fragile bodies hooked to tubes and monitors, each in a plastic cocoon that felt like a universe away from Isadora's arms. She lay in recovery, her body aching, her soul raw, and wept, not from pain, but from the miracle of their survival. Frederick, her ex-husband, was a ghost, his absence a wound she refused to let bleed. Days blurred into weeks in the hospital's sterile embrace. Isadora, discharged but tethered to the NICU, spent hours by the incubators, her fingers tracing the glass that separated her from her children. Kofi's chest rose and fell with stubborn rhythm. Malik's eyes, though closed, seemed to search for her. Elise's tiny hand twitched as if reaching for a melody. Margot's lips pursed, already rehearsing for the stage. Isadora hummed lullabies she'd composed in her loft, her voice a lifeline through the beeping machines. "You're my symphony," she murmured, her breath fogging the glass. The nurses, moved by her devotion, slipped her extra coffee, their quiet kindness a balm. At night, in a hospital cot, she wrote in a journal, pouring out fears and dreams. "They'll know music. They'll know love. They'll never know abandonment." With the quadruplets stable, Isadora brought them home to a modest brownstone in Hyde Park, a far cry from the loft she'd shared with Frederick. The settlement from their divorce was a thin lifeline, barely covering medical bills, but Isadora was no stranger to scarcity. Her mother had raised her on grit and gospel, and now she channeled that fire into motherhood. The nursery, painted soft blue, hummed with life. 4 cribs, 4 violin-shaped mobiles swaying above. She taught piano lessons in the living room, her upright piano a battered warrior, and conducted a small community choir at a local church, her baton a flicker of her old magic. Money was tight, diapers and formula a constant calculus. But Isadora's spirit was unbreakable. She sewed tiny onesies from thrift store fabric, sang to her babies during midnight feedings, and smiled through exhaustion that clawed at her bones. By their first birthday, the quadruplets were a whirlwind of personality. Kofi, the eldest by 2 minutes, was a quiet leader, his dark eyes watching the world with solemn intensity. Malik, mischievous and bold, giggled as he banged on pots, his rhythm uncanny. Elise, introspective and fair, cooed at the sound of Isadora's piano, her fingers twitching as if tracing invisible keys. Margot, a born performer, babbled with theatrical flair, her green eyes sparkling with mischief. Isadora saw her mother in their resilience, herself in their spark. She began a blog, Melodies of Resilience, typing entries on a second-hand laptop while the babies napped. "Betrayal broke me," she wrote, "but these 4 souls are rebuilding me." Women across the country responded, their comments a chorus of solidarity, calling her words a lifeline. At 2, the quadruplets' gifts emerged like notes in a rising score. Kofi plucked at a toy violin, his fingers finding melodies with eerie precision. Malik hummed complex harmonies while stacking blocks, his voice a playful echo of the choir. Elise mimicked Isadora's lullabies after a single hearing, her pitch perfect. Margot danced to every sound, her movements a choreography of joy. Isadora, scraping together savings, bought 4 tiny violins, their wood gleaming with promise. She taught them in the living room, her baton tapping rhythms on a coffee table, their laughter blending with squeaky strings. "This is our song," she told them, her voice thick with pride. The brownstone, though cramped, was a sanctuary, its walls vibrating with love and music. One evening, as the Chicago skyline glowed amber beyond the window, Isadora sat with her children, each clutching a violin. Kofi played a halting scale. Malik grinned through a wrong note. Elise focused with quiet intensity, and Margot bowed with exaggerated flair. Isadora's heart swelled, her fatigue forgotten. She opened her blog and typed, "They're my quartet, my reason, my melody." The post went live and comments flooded in. Mothers, musicians, strangers moved by her strength. Isadora looked at her sleeping babies, their violins tucked beside their cribs, and felt a fire kindle. She was no longer just a conductor of voices. She was the maestro of a new life, one that would sing louder than any betrayal. The Hyde Park brownstone vibrated with the sound of 4 tiny violins, their notes weaving a joyful chaos that spilled through open windows into the Chicago dusk. Isadora Nkrumah, now 39, stood in the living room, her baton tapping a coffee table as she guided her 7-year-old quadruplets, Kofi, Malik, Elise, and Margot, through a playful rendition of Vivaldi's Spring. Kofi, his ebony skin glowing under the lamplight, led with a soulful solo, his bow steady as a heartbeat. Malik, ever the trickster, grinned through a daring harmony, his fingers dancing on the strings. Elise, fair and introspective, played with haunting precision, her green eyes locked on her mother's cues. Margot, the performer, bowed with theatrical flair, her notes bursting like fireworks. Isadora's heart swelled, her fatigue erased by their brilliance. These were her children, her quartet, her triumph over a past that had tried to silence her. 5 years had passed since the hospital, since the NICU's sterile hum and the weight of raising 4 premature souls alone. The Nkrumah Quartet, as Isadora named them, had grown from toddling prodigies into a musical force, their talent a beacon in a world that often felt dim. At 6, they'd performed at a local festival, their synchronized bows and soaring voices drawing gas from a modest crowd. By 7, their reputation had ignited. A video of their spring performance, filmed by a neighbor at a community center, went viral, amassing 10 million views in a week. The internet crowned them Chicago's tiny virtuosos. Their faces, too dark, too fair, splashed across screens from Tokyo to Cape Town. Invitations flooded Isadora's inbox. Carnegie Hall wanted a recital, NPR craved a tiny desk concert, a morning show begged for a live slot. The world was listening, and the Nkrumah Quartet was singing. Isidora, ever their maestro, orchestrated their rise with a mother's fierce love and a conductor's precision. She hired Ruth, a warm-hearted manager with a knack for logistics, to handle bookings, freeing her to focus on the children's growth. The brownstone, once a refuge of survival, became a hub of creativity. Mornings were for school, Kofi organizing group projects, Malik charming teachers, Elise reading ahead, Margot dramatizing recess. Afternoons belonged to music, the living room a rehearsal space where Isadora taught them to blend strings and voices into a singular magic. Kofi's solos carried a depth that belied his years. Malik's technical flourishes dazzled. Elise's delicate phrasing broke hearts, and Margot's vibrant energy lit up every stage. Isadora, in simple black dresses, conducted with a fire that turned notes into stories, her baton a wand conjuring hope. Beyond the music, Isadora's own star was rising. Her blog, Melodies of Resilience, had evolved into Harmony in Adversity, a platform offering workshops for single parents and music therapy resources. Women from across the country, divorced, widowed, abandoned, flocked to her webinars, drawn by her raw honesty. "You are enough," she told them, her voice steady on grainy Zoom calls, and they believed her. She spoke at community centers, her children often tagging along, their violins tucked under tiny arms. A local TV segment called her Chicago's Voice of Strength, and though she shied from the spotlight, her message spread. The platform's modest income bought new violins, paid for school supplies, and eased the sting of Frederick's meager settlement, which had long since dwindled. But fame brought shadows. Frederick Langston, now a slick music producer, began sending emails, his tone a mix of pride and entitlement. "My kids are stars," he wrote, as if he'd ever held them through a fever or tuned their strings. Isadora deleted each message, her jaw tight, refusing to let his ghost taint their light. The children, blissfully unaware of their father, asked no questions. Kofi's focus was on perfecting his vibrato, Malik's on sneaking extra cookies, Elise's on sketching melodies, Margot's on dreaming of Broadway. Isadora protected their innocence, her love a fortress against the past. One crisp autumn evening, as the quartet practiced in the glow of fairy lights strung across the living room, Ruth arrived with a contract that stopped Isadora's heart. The Grand Monarch Hotel, Chicago's crown jewel, offered $50,000 for a single performance at a high-profile wedding. The sum was a lifeline. New instruments, college funds, a cushion against the city's relentless costs. Isadora's eyes scanned the details, her pulse quickening as she reached the names of the couple. Frederick Langston and Clara Beaumont. Her ex-husband, the man who'd betrayed her with the soprano from her choir, was marrying his mistress in a spectacle of opulence. The irony was a blade, twisting in a wound she'd thought healed. Isadora sat at her piano, the contract trembling in her hands. The children, sensing her stillness, paused their playing. "Mama, what's wrong?" Kofi asked, his dark eyes searching. She forced a smile, tucking the paper away. "Just grown-up stuff, sweet boy." But her mind raced. Refusing the gig meant breaking a contract, risking the quartet's reputation, and losing a fortune her children deserved. Accepting it meant facing Frederick and Clara, conducting her babies in a room thick with her own ghosts. She looked at her quartet, Kofi's steady gaze, Malik's impish grin, Elise's quiet focus, Margot's restless energy, and felt a fire kindle. They were her reason, her melody, her strength. That night, alone with her thoughts, Isadora opened her blog and typed, "Sometimes the stage we fear most is the one we must conquer." The words felt like a vow. She would lead her children to the Grand Monarch, not for Frederick's sake, but for theirs. The Nkrumah Quartet would play their music a defiance of the past, and Isadora would stand tall, her baton a scepter of resilience. The Chicago skyline glittered beyond her window, a promise of the battle ahead, and she closed her eyes, hearing the faint echo of Vivaldi in her soul. The Grand Monarch Hotel loomed over Lake Michigan like a palace of glass and gold, its chandeliers casting a constellation of light across the ballroom. Isadora Nkrumah stepped from a sleek limousine, her emerald gown flowing like a river of defiance, her baton tucked in a velvet case. Behind her, the Nkrumah Quartet, Kofi, Malik, Elise, and Margot, all 7 years old, emerged in tailored navy suits and dresses, their violins gleaming under the autumn dusk. Kofi adjusted his bow tie with solemn pride. Malik winked at a passing waiter. Elise clutched her sheet music, her green eyes wide. Margot twirled, her fair curls bouncing. Isadora's heart thudded, not with fear, but with purpose. Tonight she would conduct her children at the wedding of Frederick Langston and Clara Beaumont, the man who'd shattered her and the woman who'd stolen him. This was no celebration. It was her stage, and she would own it. The ballroom was a vision of extravagance. White roses cascaded from crystal vases, champagne flutes clinked in the hands of Chicago's elite, and a string quartet's soft strains floated like a prelude to opulence. Isadora guided her children through the crowd, her chin high, her gaze steady. Guests whispered, recognizing the tiny virtuosos from viral fame. But none knew the storm beneath her composure. She spotted Frederick near the dance floor, dashing in a tailored tuxedo, his chestnut hair catching the light. Clara, radiant in a lace gown, clung to his arm, her golden curls a crown of triumph. Their laughter grated like a missed note, but Isadora's face remained a mask of grace. The children, unaware of their father's presence, chattered about their performance, their innocence a shield she'd forged with love. Backstage, Isadora knelt before her quartet, her hands gentle on their shoulders. "Play from your heart," she said, her voice a warm melody. "This is our moment." Kofi nodded, his ebony skin glowing with resolve. Malik grinned, promising to steal the show. Elise's shy smile bloomed. Margot vowed to make the crowd cry. Isadora rose, her emerald gown catching the stage lights as she led them to their marks. The master of ceremonies announced, "The Nkrumah Quartet, performing Patchels Cannon in D," and the room hushed, 1,000 eyes turning to the children. Isadora raised her baton, her breath steady, and the music began. A single note from Kofi's violin, soaring like a bird breaking free. The cannon unfolded like a tapestry of resilience. Kofi's solo was a cry of strength, each stroke of his bow a testament to his mother's fire. Malik's harmony grounded it, his mischievous spirit weaving joy into precision. Elise's delicate trills, soft as moonlight, carried a haunting beauty, her fair fingers steady on the strings. Margot's vibrant flourishes burst forth, her notes a celebration of life, her green eyes dancing with the crowd's awe. The violins blended with their voices, a choral hum that rose like a prayer, filling the ballroom with a magic that transcended the occasion. Isadora conducted with a ferocity cloaked in elegance, her baton slicing through the air, her eyes burning with unspoken defiance. This was no wedding song. It was her victory, her children's triumph, a melody forged from ashes. The audience was spellbound, some dabbing tears, others leaning forward, caught in the quartet's spell. Isadora stole a glance at Frederick, his face frozen, his green eyes locked on the children he'd never known. Clara's smile faltered, her hand tightening on his arm. But Isadora felt no satisfaction, only power. Her children were not his legacy. They were hers, their music a mirror of her strength. As the final chord lingered, the ballroom erupted in applause, a thunderous wave that shook the chandeliers. The quartet bowed, Kofi's nod solemn, Malik's grin infectious, Elise's blush radiant, Margot's curtsy theatrical. Isadora stood behind them, her smile serene, her heart a fortress. As they stepped off stage, a man approached, his silver-streaked hair and warm smile cutting through the crowd's buzz. Alistair Margot, a millionaire art patron, extended a hand. "Madame Nkrumah," he said, his French accent soft, "your children are extraordinary and you are a force of nature." His eyes held admiration, not pity, and Isadora felt a spark, something new, something alive. She thanked him, her voice steady, but her mind lingered on his words. The children swarmed her, bubbling with pride, and she hugged them fiercely, their warmth grounding her. "You were perfect," she whispered, her lips brushing Kofi's forehead, Malik's cheek, Elise's hair, Margot's curls. The reception swirled around them, but Isadora remained apart, her gaze drifting to the dance floor, where Frederick and Clara swayed, their happiness a hollow note. She felt no urge to confront them. Their world was no longer hers. Alistair returned, offering sparkling water and a quiet question about her music. His presence was a balm, but Isadora's focus stayed on her children, who were now charming a group of guests with stories of their violins. The night was theirs, not Frederick's, not Clara's. As they prepared to leave, the limousine waiting, Isadora looked back at the ballroom, its glitter a fading echo. She had faced her past, conducted her pain into art, and emerged unshaken. The Grand Monarch faded behind her, but the melody of her resilience rang clear, a promise of the stages yet to come. The Chicago wind carried a crisp promise as Isadora Nkrumah stood on the balcony of her Hyde Park brownstone. The city's skyline a tapestry of light against the dawn. At 39, she was no longer the woman who'd wept in a loft's shadow. She was a maestro of her own destiny, her ebony skin radiant with hard-won peace. Her children, Kofi, Malik, Elise, and Margot, slept inside, their violins tucked beside their beds, their dreams humming with the music they'd made their own. The Nkrumah Quartet's triumph at the Grand Monarch Hotel lingered like a perfect chord, but Isadora's heart now turned to a new melody. Alistair Margot, the silver-haired art patron whose quiet admiration had sparked something she hadn't felt in years. Tonight she would meet him again, and the thought set her pulse racing, a rhythm of hope, fragile but fierce. Alistair had become a steady presence in the weeks since the wedding. He attended every quartet performance, his warm smile a beacon in crowded auditoriums. At first, Isadora kept him at arm's length, her trust scarred by Frederick's betrayal. But Alistair was different, patient, deliberate, his French accent wrapping her name like a caress. He brought bouquets of lilies for the children, their petals bright against the brownstone's worn floors, and handwritten notes for Isadora, each word a brushstroke of care. "Your strength is a masterpiece," one read, and she tucked it into her journal, her fingers lingering on the ink. Their conversations over coffee in cozy cafes or walks along Lake Michigan wove a quiet intimacy. He spoke of his love for music, his work funding arts programs for underserved youth. She shared her dreams of a music academy, her voice alight with possibility. The children, now 8, embraced Alistair with the unguarded love of youth. Kofi, the solemn leader, challenged him to chess, his dark eyes gleaming at each checkmate. Malik, the imp, roped him into art lessons, their laughter echoing as paint smeared their fingers. Elise, shy and fair, read him her poetry, her green eyes searching for approval. Margot, the performer, taught him to waltz, her curls bouncing as she spun. Alistair's patience was a gift, his presence a bridge between Isadora's guarded heart and the family she'd built. Yet she hesitated, her past a shadow that whispered caution. Could she trust again? Could love be more than a fleeting note? The past refused to stay silent. Frederick Langston, emboldened by the quartet's fame, flooded her inbox with messages, his tone a mix of regret and audacity. "I want to know my kids," he wrote, as if his absence hadn't carved a void. Isadora's jaw tightened at each email, her fingers hovering over the delete key. One afternoon, she agreed to meet him at a park, the children playing nearby, their violins left at home. Frederick, in jeans and a navy sweater, looked smaller than she remembered, his green eyes raw with something like remorse. "I was a fool," he said, handing her a coffee. Black, no sugar, the way she liked it. "I see them in the news, Isadora. They're incredible. I want to be part of their lives." Her gaze was steel. "You chose Clara. You chose yourself. They don't need a father who shows up for headlines." Frederick flinched, his hands clenching. "I've changed," he insisted. But Isadora saw the truth. A man chasing redemption, not love. She stood, her voice calm but unyielding. "They're mine, Frederick. Don't come near us." The children's laughter rang from the playground, a melody of freedom, and she walked away, her heart lighter, the door to her past firmly shut. Alistair's love grew like a crescendo, steady and sure. One evening at a quartet recital, he proposed under a canopy of stars, a simple silver ring glinting in his hand. "You and your children are my home," he said, his voice trembling. Isadora, her eyes wet, said yes, her heart finally open. They married in a small ceremony, the brownstone bursting with music as the quartet played a piece they'd composed for her. A lilting waltz, Kofi's solo soaring, Malik's harmony grounding, Elise's trills delicate, Margot's flourishes bold. Guests, including Ruth and choir members, wiped tears as Isadora danced with Alistair, her laughter a note of pure joy. Together they founded the Nkrumah Margot Music Academy, a haven offering free lessons to children in Chicago's toughest neighborhoods. The brownstone expanded into a cozy estate, its rooms alive with violin practice, chess matches, and Margot's impromptu performances. Isadora's platform, Harmony and Adversity, grew into a national network, her webinars a lifeline for single mothers. The quartet, now headlining festivals from Paris to Johannesburg, became a symbol of possibility, their music a testament to their mother's fire. At a school concert, the children dedicated a new composition to Isadora, Ode to Resilience. Kofi's nod was steady, Malik's wink playful, Elise's blush radiant, Margot's kiss blown with flair. Alistair squeezed Isadora's hand, his warmth a quiet anchor. The music swelled, a symphony of love and strength, and Isadora felt her heart expand. She was no longer defined by betrayal, but by the family she'd built, the love she'd chosen, the legacy she'd crafted. The brownstone's walls, once a refuge, now sang with a future she'd never dared dream, one where every note was hers to conduct. What a journey with Isadora and her Nkrumah quartet. From heartbreak to a symphony of love, their story sings of resilience and hope. What moved you most? Isadora's strength, the children's music, or her new beginning with Alistair? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're tuning in from. Your voice adds to our melody. Subscribe now to catch more inspiring tales and join our community of story lovers. Thank you for listening, for feeling, for being here. Until the next note, keep shining. We'll see you soon.